I'm a proud Bachelor woman. Both of my grandmothers are from beautiful Gari, also known to many as Fraser Island. I'm also connected to the Walluwarra of northwest Queensland, across the border to the Territory, or the Desachi family up that way. And being a Curry, I'm Mananjali as well. I would like to pay my respects firstly to the Jagera and Turrbal people, the traditional owners of Meanjin country that I was born into, and also a place that I could say in my youth has made a huge influence in my life of the people that I had learnt from here many years ago. I guess in saying that, I would like to acknowledge all those staunch leaders of this Brisbane community who fought and advocated for our rights in the past and still continue to do so today. I'm in my 50s now, Sammy. I work part-time with the Aboriginal Family Legal Service, Queensland. As you've mentioned, I guess I've been a family woman, but I have a long background working in community. Mm-hmm. And so I have worked, I did one of my first interviews on Murray Hour, 4ZZZ, many years ago, before we went to 4AAA. Mm-hmm. Was an announcer there. I've worked up at the Carpentaria Land Council in Burketown. I produced a little half-hour radio show that used to go around the country many years ago for Mob through ATSIC. I've lived and worked in Mount Isa, Hervey Bay, Brisbane, Burketown, Canberra, but primarily, and it has always been like so many of us, within the community and for community. I'm by no means alone. Just about every blackfella I know is doing something to try and make our lives better. So community work, and also trying to take care of family, like a lot of us do.
That's exactly right. And I'm so honoured to have you here. Thank you so much for putting in so much effort to come all the way to Brisbane and to sit with us and to yarn. And I have already, just in developing this with you, learnt so much from you. So I just can't wait to share that with everybody. So I guess a little bit about why we're here. You were a delegate at Uluru and have been part of this incredible process, which is amazing. But you, even more amazingly, when you got home from being at Uluru, sat down and just felt this overwhelming urge, I suppose, and this real need to get pen to paper about some of the reflections and the insights that you had, and you describe it as a really powerful process. Yeah. And you wrote this incredible piece, which we'll share a little bit of with people listening online today, called Heart and Hope. And it's just probably one of the most incredible things I've ever read. I was so moved when I read it, and I have read it 50 times since, and every time I learn something new.
Sammy, if I could blush, I would. But thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
We've got extraordinary artists, writers, leaders. We've just got extraordinary people all across every field of life.
We do. It's an honour to be black
from
woman.
The best.
Yeah. So. I want to make sure that we really give you the respect and the space that deserves. It's been amazing. So I guess some of the things that I just want to run through with you today was, you write, I did not initially set out to write all of this below, but it felt important to me to share my thoughts and voice at the time. I guess you could call this my own Uluru statement from the heart, although it is much longer than a mere statement. I hope you receive it well. It is one of the many views that have and will come from this gathering. You write, how I represent myself, family and community is guided by ways taught to me by my parents and elders, and I aim to do right and make them proud and be effective. Our country, lands and waters, our culture, heritage, language, arts, traditions, practices and protocols, our law and laws, our families, elders, women, men and children, our babies, our youth, our sick, traumatised, impoverished and vulnerable, and character traits, integrity, decency, generosity of ways of being and relating to others are connections, values, principles, and people important to me, like nearly all, if not all of us. And some of the ways that you have articulated your experience, you write for you, KJ, my son, and everybody can see the piece that's written on the screen at the moment. Can you give us an idea of what it was like for you personally over those 3 days, and the energy and the discussions and the care, I suppose, of which this statement was crafted?
I guess that's what I was trying to convey in this, and I might just backtrack a little bit and let people know, I guess, how I came to be at the Brisbane Regional Dialogue. There were 12 regional dialogues first all around the country, and for a lot of our mob who say they weren't consulted, it was not feasible. I believe that the Referendum Council, or those, running this process, advocated for at least 30 regional dialogues. It wasn't possible. There were 12 plus one in the ACT. I, at the time, was actually unemployed, lucky to get some casual work on the island, coming out of looking after family, a lot of years of grief, which really knocks our people around when we lose our loved ones. So, as I said, I actually felt like it was my old people giving me a bit of an urge and getting back in there. And I was invited to attend the regional dialogue as a member of the community from Hervey Bay. And at the Brisbane dialogues, there were hundreds of mob there. So from the local community, but from within the southeast Queensland region, and also those from out southwest. We deliberated over a number of days about constitutional matters, what form of recognition we would like, those sorts of matters. Out of that gathering, nominations, people were nominated and then voted to go to Uluru.
Wow.
Again, I was fortunate. I was the lucky last. So found my way to Uluru. And as mentioned in that introduction, I didn't go as a representative of an organisation or a body or any particular movement. I went with an open mind and an open heart and a willingness to listen and participate. And I believe that was the motivation of all of us there too. It was, you cannot fail to experience, you cannot fail to observe and feel the power and sense of authority and also grace, I believe, when our mobs sit together. So to have hundreds of us from the Pilbara to southwest WA, Torres Strait Islands, Victoria, Tassie, remote communities, isolated, the cities, and from all the walks of life that we have in our diversity today, we're sitting there at Yulara, at Uluru, discussing all these really important matters, business for us, and everything was brought up. Deaths in custody is always an issue for us. Seeing our young people locked up in numbers that are the highest proportionally in the world. Our young people should be healthy, thriving, supported to fulfill their full potential in life, to become leaders like Professor Davis. A person who has worked her entire life and really hard to excel in a field of constitutional law. That's something to admire and to inspire young people, instead of, being locked up and those sorts of things. Protection of country, women's issues. Look, we discussed anything and everything, broke up into groups. And yes, there was a small group that went to the gathering with the purpose of being in opposition. And that's fair because we don't all think alike. And it's that, our mob have always been strong in speaking up, and that was fine. But for those who said they didn't have a voice, they were often the loudest. And it was only a small group who ended up walking out. So there was clearly consensus amongst the hundreds of delegates that were sitting there at Uluru.
Mm. And you have told me before of the power of what it felt like to sit side by side in the red dirt, and you said it's something that you'll never forget.
Yeah, and I think this is something really important to convey to people who perhaps question the power of a voice, an advisory body enshrined in the Constitution of Parliament. I've heard that it's just crumbs off the table. I've heard that it's powerless. It's not going to get us anywhere. But again, I bring it back to whether it's a small group or a group of hundreds or a group of 20 or 30, when our mobs sit together, we are strong and powerful. We have authority and grace, and whether we need to go and sit at that table again and again, but it's hard to deny what we say. It's hard to deny that authority, knowledge, wisdom. And I think there is power that we forget about in that. And it's not a real out there on the streets marching loud, which is what we also need. Where that has got us attention to issues that we would never have had before. We need our activists today still. The issues still require that staunchness, but we require our lawyers, our doctors, our teachers, people who work in counselling services, providing psychological help to the many traumatised people that we have in our community. We need our artists, singers, writers. We just need everybody. And those people are out there everywhere in our community. Every single community in Australia, we have our mob working day in, day out to try and make the lives of not only our own children, but all Australian children's lives better. The mums and aunties and nanas that go into schools year after year so that they can, helping to confront racism within institutions, but to share their language and culture and the laws of their own nation. So
there's a loud strength and there's a quiet strength, and you say that there was both in that dirt.
Yeah.
That's really beautiful.
It's undeniable, and I think we need to remember it.
Yeah, a great reminder, particularly at this time. You say, I am by no means alone. I truly felt I was urged by my old people, and I certainly owed it to them, all those before me, and to my and our many loved ones that we've lost through the many days and weeks and months and years, to go to this gathering with an open mind and an open heart. And I think what you've spoken to just here really shows that the gathering brought so much strength and really highlighted our ability to come together, which is a beautiful thing. Do you want to read the next piece, which is part of your statement?
Yeah. So just, again, I've been telling everyone, and this is, what gets me about this discussion and this promotion of this idea that it's elite blackfellas who are promoting this. I'm the furthest thing from elite we could get. I had a busted ass second-hand iPhone 4 and I came home and I wrote this, and I wrote two parts. I also wrote about the disrespect and disruption shown by a few people that were up there, but I've, put that aside, and this here, and I guess, I sat down and I wrote for a couple of days afterwards because it was powerful and very moving experience, but I'll share a little bit more of what I wrote at that time. Despite many and varied voices, ideas and opinions, radically and loudly so in some ways amongst our mob, it was clear to me that each person present was united in asserting passionately and unequivocally our sovereignty, and that it has never been ceded. We all repeated the loud and generations-long calls for a treaty. We all called for the need for our voices to be properly heard for us to talk to government about the laws and policies made regarding us and which affect our lives, for the truths of our history to be told, and that we seek justice through constitutional, legislative and structural reforms. Real, lasting and not just symbolic, fleeting changes for us mob for now and into the future. This was an extraordinary gathering of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples from every region across this vast and incredible continent and its islands. Rich in diversity and coming from all walks of life, grassroots mob, community people and workers, young people, elders, leaders, professionals and academics across all disciplines, artists, dancers, health workers, land council members and all representing the span of nations and communities we come from, remote, isolated, rural, regional, urban, metropolitan, those deeply sophisticated in ancient cultural authority and protocols and practices, and those in modern cosmopolitan, well-versed and travelled international ways. From the salt water and sea, the rainforest, the red dirt of the desert, great sandy regions, the rivers, the lakes, grass plains and mountain ranges, islands, the snow and cold country, to the tropics and so on, all of us together. On my first morning there, the thought occurred to me that if I were to look at each of our mob who was present and how that individual represented a country, a people, culture, law, language and so forth, each of us standing on the shoulders of a minimum of a 65,000 years of ancient humanity. Collectively within the Uluru meeting, we, that's all of us, had the representation of millions, I repeat, millions of years of humanity, law, culture, language, wisdom and knowledge within one place. That is what I sat amongst. In the sacred heart of this continent, in a place of great reverence, guided with the gentle leadership of elders, Auntie Alison and Uncle Philip, and the generosity of members of the Anangu people and the Mutijulu community, we carried out our business with trust and faith in all of that collective cultural authority and knowledge, and in our own intelligence, life experiences, hearts and minds, and in each other. Together, we are incredibly mighty and powerful, and we have work to do.
That's so beautiful. Every time I hear you speak at all, it gives me goosebumps. I guess reflecting on that, what do you want people to know most about this place and in this moment in 2017, and what can they draw from it now?
I think first it truly is a significant historical moment, an event, and it was the processes. It's the culmination of decades, generations long calls for our mob to have a voice, a proper voice that is listened to by the Commonwealth, but one that can't be taken away. That was the purpose of it, the call for it to be enshrined in the Constitution. Mm-hmm. Well, the main one is that this was the way that we decided we wanted recognition within the Constitution. And that recognition is through a voice, and that recognition is simply about our fellow Australians finally acknowledging and hopefully accepting and also celebrating that they too belong to a culture, and have a heritage that is 65,000 years plus. A recognition of us being here since the beginning of time. And I've thought recently too, our culture, our laws, our languages, our caring for country, It's older than all the world's major religions put together. And, you know, I don't know if anyone's ever said this and whether I get in trouble, but quite frankly, I think Jesus would be sitting with us.
I think you might be right.
You know, like 65,000 years, it is almost incomprehensible. But it is also about us being able to speak to those, as we know, who make the decisions about our lives. So we can lift our people up out of poverty and all those issues that go with it. You know, I've heard in recent weeks in particular that a lot of Australians are switched off this movement and the referendum because of the cost of living crisis. I've not heard one journalist or commentator throw in there that blackfellas have had a cost of living crisis since 1788. For those people who are concerned about perhaps losing their home, they're fortunate they have a home to lose. Many of our people are homeless, which is a shame, you know, those sorts of things, the poverty, everything that comes from that has been entrenched in this country. This is but one way that we hope to alleviate those sorts of problems and issues when we've got people who know and are doing who know the issues because they're living with them daily, they're trying to address them within their community organisations. They're the mob that we need to hear from and to have the avenue so that their voices are heard. And it is about a grassroots movement, this campaign, but it is very much about giving voice to blackfellas in local and regional communities.
Indigenous advice on Indigenous issues.
Remember something later, but
that's okay. Please feel free to jump in at any time. The next thing you write is, my hope is that love, respect and compassion for ourselves and each other remains a binding force among us. We just mentioned there that this is a really important opportunity to lift us out of the poverty, and I think this is also a really important opportunity for us to talk about getting blackfellas out of this detriment narrative that seems to follow us everywhere. And of course it's true that blackfellas are certainly experiencing some of the worst conditions that we would ever see across the world, and it's critically important that we do something to lift us out of the current situation. We're living now with a no, and it's not working.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point.
That's right.
And Bruce, the rapper, said that recently. I think that was a fantastic response to, you know, what if it's no on October 15th? And he said, well, we already live in that.
That's right.
You know, we have to make a change. This is an opportunity. And it really is an opportunity that will come once in a lifetime.
Yeah.
Another referendum is not going to happen on this issue in my lifetime. And adding to that, for those of our mob who call for treaty first, we are still advocating for that. That is still part of our asserting our rights, speaking up for country, laws, our mob, all of this stuff. But we also believe that we needed to have that voice in order to negotiate these treaties. And I think for all of our mob who are considering voting no because they philosophically wanting the treaty first, I would like them to reconsider because the reality is if there is a no vote on the 15th of October, governments will see that as an opportunity to do nothing or in a mandate to do nothing. And processes towards treaty for mob, I think, will be delayed, be obstructed. In fact, I would just ask them to reconsider and join all us deadly mob. There's just incredibly solid mob, women and leaders from communities everywhere. Dr. Josie Douglas from the Land Council and the Territory. a woman of immense cultural knowledge, intelligence, wisdom and grace. Graceland Smallwood from Townsville, her entire life advocating for our people and working so hard within health and really the whole community in all of these sorts of issues. Young people, we've got extraordinary young people who are not just coming through, they're there standing up now already from all over. They're solid. You know, please consider a yes vote on the 14th of October. We really do need this. Every single vote will count. There was something else in there I wanted to say, but it slipped my mind.
We can absolutely come back to it.
Yeah.
So our generosity of spirit and ways is but one of our multitude of gifts to the world. It is our common hope to survive and thrive today and into the future with good health and prosperity for at least another 60,000 years. And you speak about the cleverness and the articulateness and the earnest, passionate, outspoken, hardworking, determined, persistent and diligent people. And you say that all of those things were what you witnessed at Uluru, that you got to see and feel and sit beside all of it. And you say we all know that it is our efforts which lead, drive and make change. We are the beneficiaries of the generations before us, and they always asserted our rights and connections to our lands. Our elders advocated, agitated, organised, fought on country, on the streets, and took our rightful and just cause into both the homes of our fellow citizens and into the halls of power. They were fierce, formidable, clever, cunning, dignified, gentle and graceful, gracious, strong, beautiful, determined and resolute, and we are too. And I guess what that really says to me is that everything that we have empowered before and all of the big movements that have done so much for our mob and the shoulders of the giants that we stand on are being seen in the leaders who are driving this movement today. And I guess I just wanted to get your kind of thoughts on what would a yes vote mean for this country? We talk a lot about, or we hear a lot about the fear campaigns and the politics that are involved in this referendum. And I guess there's a lot of murkiness to a lot of that that can be quite confronting and quite exhausting for a mob. And thinking about the time that you were filled with so much hope sitting at Uluru, and when you look to now, what does a yes vote mean? What would it mean to you outside of this country? What does a yes vote mean to you?
I would actually I think I would cry and because it will be such a momentous moment in this country's history. It will mean this country has finally grown up, matured. I mean, you know, how can we be in 2023 and there is no acknowledgement, no recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in the Australian Constitution? You know, something which it would mean that our fellow Australians accept that. And I would like to think that we can all walk with our heads held up higher, feel good in our hearts and in our minds about this. It's not the end of a journey. It's another step on it, but it's one that hopefully gives us more strength, more authority, you know, and giving us that ability to make the changes that we need to do within our community. I think we all know, for those of us who work in community, whether it's in government organisations or a community one, or you're doing voluntary work, there are so many of our elders who do voluntary work. I sit on a board with, you know, a few Aboriginal women who are in their 70s who's still managing native title business, and that's like a full-time job. You know, and they're on board with it, and they're out there representing and speaking up and standing up for us still, you know.
Yeah. It's incredible, really, when we look at the work that has been put into this and the work that is still to come.
Yeah.
It's really important that we don't shy away from the work and that we acknowledge that this is just one step. It's not the step.
Yeah.
It's just one step,
I
which
guess
is important.
I just want to add that I think in what I wrote was really it's a reflection. I just have so much love and pride for my people, and that's all of us. You know, yeah, we get wild with each other at times and that, but we truly are extraordinary. Simply that we are here, that we advocate still, that we do have language, law, culture, where it's been impacted by colonisation, it's been revived. You know, I'm really proud of things like we now call the island Gari. You know, ancient names. You know, this is all about this country owning its heritage, its history, but also facing and confronting those moments in our history which have led to that extreme disadvantage that we experience. And those words, and when we talk about, you know, our mob are the most disadvantaged within Australian life across every indicator, economically, socially, the law, and all of those sorts of things, this is about people's lives. You know, I've lost family members who, you know, we talk about the life expectancy rate. My dear father at 51, an uncle at 39. I've lost relatives to suicide, older as well as our youth. Kidney, renal disease, diabetes. These are people's lives. You know, when it comes to our kids, our little ones. I met a lady in Gympie last night, and she has a family member who works as a doctor in the Territory, and her family member actually cries because of the number of children who are presenting with rheumatic heart fever. This is about people's lives, and I guess really too, a lot of this, or all of this, is about our kids. I'm going to be here and gone. You know, the likes of Price, Mundine, Dutton, here and gone. Our children are here, and their children will be here, and it's their children. We're thinking about all those kids who are yet to come as well, and we want them to be healthy with a good education, living their best lives, as everybody says. You know? We deserve that as much as every other human on the planet.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. And with a little bub of my own, I do look at this and think, I hope that he's not fighting the same fights that you fought for your whole life. And I guess that's what we're hoping will remind Australians to vote yes and to say, you know, little Dom shouldn't be fighting the same fights as Auntie Shireen. You know, we should be moving past this. This is 2023.
Be astronauts if they want to be. Rock climbers.
That's exactly right.
Can I just add with, and it was something that you touched on earlier too, about talking about, I guess, all those detriments. And I think I mentioned in that, you know, we're all very well aware and we live with intergenerational trauma. But I like to remind us, and myself even, that we also live with intergenerational love and wisdom and knowledge and compassion. And we can draw on that, I think, from each other, but also just being on country. You know, even in the big city, you can go outside and appreciate the sky, put your foot on, you know, go to the park or something. Country heals and our people heal too.
Something that you mentioned yesterday when we were yarning about today was how much healing there is in gathering, and that sometimes people forget that actually when we're sitting side by side, there's so much power in that, and it's a quiet power. It's not a loud power.
Yeah. Well, I think Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women, we really know that. We are nurtured and we nurture each other, and that's what enables us to carry on.
Yeah, beautifully put. And I guess if we jump into what was agreed, I mean, it's important to note that symbolic, pretty minimalist constitutional recognition was comprehensively rejected throughout the 12 regional dialogues and the additional ACT one at the National Convention. Delegates and those protesting and in opposition to the Referendum Council's processes and directions actually all agree on this principle and core issues. So I guess I'll come to what you write about this piece, and it's all delegates asserted sovereignty, calls for treaty, the need for a voice that will be heard and listened to via a constitutional reform, the protection of country, kin, heritage and culture and our rights under customary and common law, and again to have a formal process of revealing the true history of the Australian nation, and particularly how the structural, legal and institutional foundations of invasion, dispossession, genocide, racial discrimination and policies of governments of the day keep us entrenched in dire poverty, ill health and powerlessness and helplessness today. It is for these reasons we require change at those levels, yet we seek to lead the campaign for these changes and drive it from the grassroots up. I've long believed it takes all of us to do our bit to make positive change, as it always has. What do you think people need to know about the amount of strength and sovereignty and the real discussions and the robustness of those discussions? I mean, some of the critiques of this movement have been, it's not actually going to make any change and it's not actually going to do anything. And I guess when we look at what you've written and we acknowledge the fact that we play to our strengths and acknowledge and we support each other, what do you think people need to know about the next piece, so about what was agreed and why it was agreed?
Good question. I guess it's at the core of it that those, out of the dialogues, there is a more comprehensive analysis, I believe. I'm just trying to think. And I'm not too well up on this, but this is, I guess, out of the dialogues, they were all very well recorded, all the discussions. At the dialogues and also up at Uluru, we broke into smaller groups for discussions. We'd go back to the larger group, discuss more, all sorts of issues, things on the table. And, and then I'm just trying to think, I'm not sure if we voted on everything, but it was clear anyone who had something to say had the opportunity to have a say. I'm not sure actually how to answer that one, except that certainly the constitutional enshrinement of the voice was advocated strongly throughout all the dialogues, and not just that symbolic, like a pretty little poetic piece, in a preamble or something that which did actually, will have its own clause within the Constitution. And that does, that's how we said we wanted our recognition, through a voice. And I think that ties in with the fundamental principle of Aboriginality, that those who belong to country speak for it. I think you could say. Treaty, again, this is nothing new. Our mob have called for this ever since, and we continue to do so. Those a process that is underway in Queensland and I believe perhaps in Victoria and in South Australia. And truth-telling, every single dialogue, and the gathering, truth-telling is about we're wanting our fellow Australians to know their history so that they understand, well, one, what they actually hopefully will not just recognise and accept but celebrate to one day, but also to understand why we live with such horrendous, shameful issues today. The truth-telling, the atrocities, the attempts at genocide, all the horrible things that we are well aware of and that we still live with the ongoing effects of those historical events, It's so that our fellow Australians understand that, not feel guilt in any way, but just know your history, own it, you know.
Yeah. The white Australia has a black history, right?
Yeah.
It's about more than, I guess, the cultural awareness. It's about the cultural intelligence and moving beyond.
There is
being
so
aware.
much ignorance in the community still, and this is after decades of our mob having been university educated and actually teaching the teachers, you know. So, you know, you have to call racism out too. It's there. It seems to be the dirty word, but there's institutional racism, and there is that overt daily, you know, whether it's microaggressions or overt, our people still confront and affects our lives, whether it is trying to secure a home for our families, you know, in private rentals, for example.
And I think there's a racism in the silence as well, which can be even more dangerous than the overtness of some of the racism that has certainly been stirred up in some of these conversations. I guess the piece of this that I really take away is your conviction about the love and the hope and your love of mob and the importance of sovereignty to you. And you're right, before I get towards the end of this, I want to express what sovereignty means in its essence to me. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. And there's a piece here that you wrote about the way that you hold yourself as an Aboriginal woman. Do you want to maybe share that with everyone listening?
I think for me, and look, when I say I'm an old activist, so I've actually got an old reel-to-reel interview sitting at home where I sat with Kevin Gilbert, who was recognised as the first playwright who wrote The Cherry Pickers, but also one of the first people that I heard speak about sovereignty in the way that we speak about it today. He'd written several books on this matter too, but in our sovereignty, I think for some of our mob too, is not a sovereignty like Europeans. It's not about kings and queens, but it's about those who belong to country and speak for country and have that authority. But for me, as I've written here, it's about how I relate to others within my family, within my clan and my nation, and with my neighbours and other mob and out in the wider world. I try to do so with dignity and respect because it is our law and our way, and I am motivated by a deep, abiding love and gratitude for my family. Is that not what inspires all of us? Both my parents were proud and strong in their Aboriginality, and I am truly grateful I was growing up in this. My political understanding of sovereignty developed when I first heard an activist, writer and poet speak so powerfully and eloquently about this in Canberra in the late 1980s, and sitting around the fire of the Aboriginal 10 Embassy in 1992 with mob, once again from all across the continent. And again later in my political education among my peers and some of the many deadly Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander and South Sea Islander women of southeast Queensland and our dear friends and allies. So I think it's essentially, and I think this is something that I really love and admire about our people, is that I do believe we have an inherent grace and dignity, and that's what I've grown up with and observed in my life. And look, I can be just as wild and loud as any other black fella, but I hope that above all I behave in a way which I can have respect for myself and others.
Yep, the way that you bring so much peace to the room is really a beautiful way of moving in the world, I suppose. We're very lucky.
I get wild too.
The good ones do. So I guess the next piece, and I'm conscious that we do have a couple of questions that I want to make sure that we give time to, but I think that this last piece is really important and a way to kind of wrap it up. And I guess it's the one voice and the treaty and the truth. And you say, I acknowledge the power of your spirit and that of your gracious and indomitable Anangu people. It was my honour to be there and to see you and be close. And I feel now I shall always be called back, just like the spirit of my Gari always called me back home. Ancient songlines, the compass of stars in the night sky, old trade routes and highways connect us all in the vastness of this continent, and that sovereignty was never ceded. And I guess that beautiful reflection of what it meant for you to be at Uluru and the truth about what happened for you at Uluru is a really important piece for us to kind of wrap up with, I suppose, before I do jump in and make sure that we answer some of these questions. And the topic today was what really happened at Uluru. And I guess for me, it was really important that we got to share your truth about the process and about the moment for you and about the spirituality and the strength that you draw from that. So I guess,
and I think also too, like, and reinforcing the message that is from the people to the people. It's not from politicians at all. It's not Labor's voice. It's not anybody's voice, but all the mob who participated in the dialogues around the country and then at the Constitutional Convention at Uluru. It's our voices, you know, and voices which are saying the same things that our ancestors have said.
It's a beautiful way of summing it all up, I suppose. It's, you know, from the people to the people.
Yeah.
And there's a really great question here from Lisa that says, how can white Australians be the best allies for First Nations people? And I'll just preface that by saying it's one of the biggest questions I've ever seen, and maybe we could do a whole webinar on it. But I guess from your perspective, what are the things that stand out for you really, particularly during this time? We've spoken before about the exhaustion that this kind of process brings for us.
Personally, I am so grateful for every one of my fellow citizens who isn't Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, who has just vocalised, demonstrated their support for us. I'm so grateful because right now, today, we're less than 2 weeks away from 14th of October. Every single vote will count. The pollsters and the political commentators have been saying for some time we're on a losing streak. I have hope, and I also know that there are so many people out there. If we look at the walk in Brisbane recently, that lifted the heart of me and I'm sure mob all around the country. You know, we had walks in Harvey Bay, you know, a little yarn there in Gympie last night. But I guess for our allies is make connections with those in your local community and organisations, the country, you know, the mob whose country you live and work on.
And what does that look like? For somebody who has not done a lot of community work or has not done a lot of engaging with First Nations people, when we, as mob, we say, well, why don't you just connect with the people in your community? That makes so much sense for us because it's who we are as a people. What do you think it looks like for somebody who's not First Nations to make those connections?
Well, you got Google, you know, I guess for a start, put in Aboriginal community organisations. And our mob are very down to earth. If someone was to call up, you know, maybe that particular organisation doesn't have a way for people to assist in some way, but they might be able to refer them to an organisation that needs volunteers or needs some support, or you could provide, you know, link in with social and personal support, but that organisational too. It might be that you have a professional capacity in which you can assist our mob and community. I think that's your starting point, is where you live and work, if you can make connection with mob. And if mob are few and far between, keep looking. Maybe in the meantime, hit some books for a bit of history and reach out a bit further.
And I guess what I really hear you saying and correct me if I'm wrong, but the importance of the allyship here is that it's visual and that we feel seen and that we feel supported. And that's things like a march where we had tens of thousands of people show up and really support mob, but also in organisationally, people putting out yes statements.
Yes.
There's so many things that we can
countering, having conversations, countering the lies. It's not just misinformation, it's bullshit and lies that are coming from people in the No campaign. That's just the facts. But call it out. If you can, write letters to an editor, get on social media, but perhaps just spread the word. And there is plenty of information online. But we really do need every yes vote. It is an opportunity once in a lifetime. And I say, let's go, Queensland.
That's right. And I guess to wrap it up, this is a beautiful photo that people can see now of the reality of what that moment was like. And I guess to finish up for people, what do you feel when you look at this photo? What's the message of hope for people from here? We I guess
my
would
heart
love
and
to
spirit
hear it.
lifts. My heart and spirit lifts, and I have not been back up that way, but I can't wait for the day that I do. I grew up out in Mount Isa too, and through the Aboriginal Family Legal Service, I've had a couple of road trips out southwest. I love the red dirt country. In fact, I probably love country everywhere. There's some beauty in every nation. It was truly, truly special. I'm very proud to have been there, and I'm very proud to be a signatory to the Uluru Statement from the Heart, and I will continue to have hope even beyond 14th of October.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us and for sharing and for just giving everything that you do so graciously.
I hope this was all good for everybody.
Oh, we are so grateful. I can see messages coming through here of people who are saying thank you so much for sharing with us today, and people who have to drop out but who are just so grateful for everything that you have shared and everything that you have done.
Thank you.
I don't even have words, I guess. I just want to make sure that we have expressed our gratitude. Thank you so much for coming all the way down from Hervey Bay just to be with us today. And thank you to everybody who did jump online. I will make sure that I share all of the beautiful thank yous that are coming through from
Can I just
Shireen.
say quickly too, I want to thank Kathleen Winson, who is the CEO of the Aboriginal Family Legal Service. I'm getting a bit emotional because, and even yourself, because I like a lot of that mob. The things we go through in our life can knock us around. You lose a bit of confidence and hope. And this last year working again to help our mob has really lifted me, my spirit, my heart, my confidence, and I'm really grateful for the affirmation that you all give me.
We are so lucky to have you, and we're so lucky Auntie Kath has ducked in, and we are definitely all a little bit teary, and there'll be lots of hugs later on. But I guess it's just a beautiful example of what happens when mobs support each other and we're here for each other. And, AFLSQ has been a beautiful way for you to reconnect with mob and to really find your calling. We are so lucky to have you. And it's really just been such a pleasure for us.
Thank you, Sandy.
We, could not be more grateful and hope to be able to continue to just support you and to do whatever we can to amplify your voice, because it's so critical and people need to hear it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I would like to thank you for your engagement and for the questions and for the thank yous that have come through. It's been very humbling and moving to be able to sit here and talk with Auntie Shireen, and for just sharing so much of yourself with us. We are so lucky.
I'm just one of so many of our women. We are extraordinary. And actually, one thing I would just like to add, and one of your researchers out there might like to follow this up. I've been thinking for some years, I wonder if Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women are in fact the most educated people proportionally in Australian society. Now, I know so many deadly women without degrees, but I know so many deadly women who are professors and doctors, have degrees with honours and that. And these are women who may have studied at mature age or went into tertiary education young. And anyway, I think that's just something I think for us to think about and even add to how deadly we are.
That's exactly right. And about how much is not seen in education, people who are completely unqualified, who are some of the wisest women I have ever sat and yarned with. So I hope that somebody picks that up, because if they don't, then we might.
And thank you to everybody listening.
Yeah, it's really humbling to have everybody listening. So before everybody goes, I'll just quickly remind you to please complete the feedback survey. It will pop up on your screen once we close the webinar, and your feedback helps us to continually improve our webinar program and to make sure that we're aligned with what's needed in the sector in particular. So we hope to see you at the next CLCQ webinar, and bye for now.